As always, the Music Tyrant welcomes you to his lair, the lair of unadulterated, supreme musical truth upon which the soul feasteth and grows in its wisdom, understanding, and appreciation of all things music. Forget what you think you know, or prepare to have it confirmed, and as always, proceed with caution. Ladies and gentlemen, music fans and atomic punks who dig those hot summer nights, today the Music Tyrant will be unchained from our traditional Album of the Day episodes to expertly delve into the best of both worlds. You see, the topic of discourse today is none other than the hotly debated who is the better Van Halen frontman, David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar.
It's not necessary to make a comparison. I don't think you have to make a choice, but Van Halen demands it. Van Halen is demanding, for some bizarre, retarded reason, for the audience to make a choice. You have to either love us and hate him or vice versa.
So sit back, but don't turn off your brain, and watch in awe as the Music Tyrant tackles this topic with unparalleled expertise and analysis. Oh man, who can forget when Van Halen burst onto the scene in 1978 with their self-titled debut album, which has since become known as Van Halen 1. Never before had the world had such guitar-ripping prowess unleashed upon it. And make no mistake about it, any conversation about Van Halen, even if the conversation is about Van Halen vocalists, must begin with Edward Van Halen and the guitar. Not just because EVH is the greatest guitar player in the history of music, and not just because of what he can do with the instrument in terms of technique, solos, and sounds that had never been heard before. Sounds and techniques executed with such precision and perfection. Sounds and techniques and licks that have been copied over and over again, but never duplicated. But it's the riffs, it's the music that makes up these iconic songs that anyone with a discerning and tasteful ear cannot do without. However, when the world was introduced to Van Halen's debut album in 1978, or more accurately, when the world had Van Halen's debut album unexpectedly unleashed upon it in 1978, there was way more to Van Halen than just the guitar. You had thunderous, world-class percussion from Alex Van Halen that stood out and could stand alone. Bass lines galore. None of that traditional run-of-the-mill, just hold down the rhythm section bass playing. Even the bass playing could stand alone, as evidenced by the fact that Michael Anthony performed bass solos at Van Halen concerts. That's right. Precious concert time carved out for the bassist to show off his chops. And the special, rare thing about it all is how the three instruments melded perfectly together without having one vying for the spotlight over the other. A perfect mesh of individual, elite musical talent seamlessly unifying to produce one single, cohesive, majestic song. And that was every song. And laid perfectly over all of it were those vocals. That vocal presentation so confidently delivered with overflowing swagger and charisma by the famous and/or infamous David Lee Roth, aka DLR. So who can forget 1978? When Van Halen burst onto the scene and unleashed a sonic masterpiece, engraving forever an indelible musical mark upon an unsuspecting world. Likewise, who can forget the announcement just 7 short years later in April of 1985 that DLR had been fired from, or quit, Van Halen? Surely this would mark the end of Van Halen, as some sources in fact reported that the band had broken up. But only 5 months later, on September 22nd, 1985, it was announced that the highly esteemed Sammy Hagar would be joining the almighty Van Halen as DLR's replacement. The result was 1986's 5150, which gave Van Halen its first #1 album on the Billboard charts. This started a run of success for the next several years that was a notch above what Van Halen had experienced during the David Lee Roth years. Yep, that's right. Arguably the world's biggest band got even bigger after they replaced their vocalist. And the Music Tyrant is here to tell you, very, 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 very few, if any, could pull that off besides Van Halen. So let's lock in with laser-like precision, as only the Music Tyrant can, on the matter at hand. Who was the better Van Halen frontman, DLR or Sammy Hagar? But before we get this party started, two important things must be pointed out. Number one, everybody is going to have an opinion on this, which is fine. If your opinion is based on facts and is correct, then it will line up with what the Music Tyrant immutably declares. And number two, if you have ever referred to, or if you know anyone who has ever referred to Van Halen with Sammy Hagar on vocals as Van Hagar, then you not only have disqualified yourself, and the person you know that is engaged in this tomfoolery has not only disqualified himself from having an opinion, but any and all credibility in the realm of music has been fully and eternally lost. Now, let us proceed. The first two lines of the first song of Van Halen's 1982 album, Diver Down, DLR's second to last album with the band, David Lee Roth sings, as only he can. All my life I never stopped to worry about a thing. Open up and shout it out and never try to sing. This is a perfect summation of DLR's vocals. Shout it out and never try to sing. What exactly is the Music Tyrant saying here? Well, what I am not saying is that David Lee Roth cannot sing. Nor am I saying that DLR is not a good vocalist. What I am saying is that this line is the perfect summation to David Lee Roth's approach to life and his musical career. No worries, no frets. Just get out there and throw all of yourself out there. The confidence, the charisma, the I have arrived attitude before, during, and after the arrival has taken place. Is that not just quintessential Van Halen? Here we are. We're ready to rock. We're going all out, whether you're all in or all out, whether we are perfectly perfect, completely imperfect, or somewhere in between. It doesn't matter because we're Van Halen. How did DLR introduce himself to the world? The first line of the first song on Van Halen's first album is, I live my life like there's no tomorrow. So again, David Lee Roth's approach to vocals was, here I am, perfectly imperfect or imperfectly perfect, and I am in no way beholden to any of your opinions. You are completely beholden to me. And if you think about it, could there have been a more fitting or more splendid attitude for the vocalist of Van Halen when they burst onto the scene? Absolutely not. So what about DLR's range? Look, no one ever accused David Lee Roth of having a dynamic vocal range. But what he did possess was an incredible voice inflection with an uncanny knack for making one-of-a-kind shrieking sounds and vocal fills, as I call them. And these things added another layer to the Van Halen songs. So although he wasn't gifted with the best vocal range, he was able to carve out a piece in every song for his voice. And his voice served as another musical instrument. Another thing that Roth was able to accomplish that not many vocalists can is, his vocals carried a certain gravitas that made you believe what he was saying. Now, one of the biggest knocks on David Lee Roth throughout his career has been his lack of singing live. And look, no one can ever accuse DLR of delivering live performances that sounded like the albums, ever. But if you've ever seen Van Halen in concert, you know David Lee Roth always had the crowd in the palm of his hand. In that regard, he's always been the consummate frontman and entertainer, just oozing with swagger and charisma, as I previously stated. DLR the frontman always made sure you got your money's worth when you went to a Van Halen show. So, what about Sammy Hagar? Well, first of all, you don't just step into arguably the biggest band in the world as the replacement vocalist and then help bring that band to even greater success than it had previously experienced if you're not something special. In fact, how did Sammy Hagar introduce himself to the world as Van Halen's new vocalist? With two words that formulated the biggest introduction heard round the world in the exclamatory first words of the first song of Sammy's first album with the band, 5150, when he shrieked, "Hello, baby!" As if to say, "I'm here." No use wishing David Lee Roth's voice was rupturing your eardrums right now, because I, Sammy Hagar, representing Van Halen, am here. And if you haven't already forgotten about DLR, then you soon will. And boy, did we forget about Roth. I mean, how could we hold on to DLR any longer? With that unbelievable range and power with which Sammy knocked our faces off? When Sammy opened up his mouth, you knew this guy can flat out sing. The consummate professional of his craft. A serious musician. And is that attitude not just quintessential Van Halen? Here we are. We're the kings of hard rock. Serious musicians who never put anything before you that is not top shelf musicianship. We exude musical perfection in every facet. You might be thinking, but Music Tyrant, didn't you just say, when talking about David Lee Roth's debut, that Van Halen's attitude was laissez-faire? We don't care if we're perfectly imperfect or imperfectly perfect? Aren't you contradicting yourself? Yes, I did say that. And no, the Music Tyrant is not contradicting himself, because Van Halen is both. Never will you receive a musical offering from Van Halen that is not elite in its musicianship, yet seemingly delivered from the hands of a humble pauper. Van Halen will always crush and awe you with their impeccable songs, but never do so with the smug, elitist, we take ourselves so seriously and you're not worthy attitude. And yet, we still don't feel worthy when we hear Van Halen. And that dichotomy is but one piece of the absolute greatness of Van Halen. But, back to Sammy Hagar. Sammy Hagar has one of the greatest ranges in rock and roll history, which is one of the biggest reasons why he is one of the greatest pure singers in rock and roll history. And as sometimes happens to other vocalists, the strength of his voice never seemed to be compromised on recordings. But what really set Sammy apart were his live performances. Sammy Hagar always delivered live. If you've ever seen Van Halen in concert with Sammy, you could close your eyes, and if it didn't sound just like the album, that was only because it sounded better. Sammy Hagar, the vocalist, always made sure you got your money's worth when you went to a Van Halen show. As a frontman, Sammy Hagar's calling card was never his ability to take complete control of a crowd and take them where he wanted them to go. And you know, that's probably because throughout his career, his ability as a vocalist held its own prominent position within the entirety of the band, even when he was a solo performer. Is the Music Tyrant claiming that Sammy could not and did not captivate and hold a crowd? Absolutely not. He could, and he did, but he did it within the context of the entire band. And so the time has come for the Music Tyrant to perfectly process all of today's information with the goal of reaching a verdict, and to do so with unparalleled accuracy and excellence. And he will do so with the Van Halen vocalist rubric. When it comes to vocal range, Sammy is the clear winner here. On a scale of 1 to 5, he is obviously a 5, with DLR coming in at about a 2. When it comes to voice inflection, Sammy was certainly no slouch, especially when it came to Van Halen. He certainly expanded his inflection game, as that had become part and parcel of Van Halen's songs. However, David Lee Roth owns a slight edge in this category, winning 5 to 4. When DLR said it, you believed it. When Sammy said it, you more or less felt like he was just belting out some good time lyrics and/or love song lyrics. Really no competition here, with DLR winning this category 5-3. As a pure singer, Sammy Hagar is one of the all-time greats. Although David Lee Roth is certainly nowhere near being a bad singer, Sammy easily wins this category 5-3. As in the range category, there is no competition in the category of live vocal performance. Sammy wins this one going away 5-2. Very few hard rock frontmen could hold a crowd like David Lee Roth. In this category, he is one of the all-time greats. DLR gets a 5-3 edge here. And finally, as head-to-head entertainers, David Lee Roth owns this category 5-2. Final tallies? We have a tie!
Oh, I can hear the weeping and gnashing of teeth already. How could you, Music Tyrant? This settles nothing. Oh, but it settles everything. Van Halen is Van Halen. Who else could pull off replacing their vocalist at the time in their career when they did and get even better? No one. Look, Van Halen had a tremendous run with David Lee Roth, and no one else could have filled the shoes of Van Halen's vocalist from 1978 through 1985 like DLR did, and produced some of the greatest, most classic Van Halen songs ever during that time. But, and even though much speculation remains concerning what I'm about to say, no one could have filled the shoes of Van Halen's vocalist after the departure of David Lee Roth other than Sammy Hagar. Gary Sharon, anyone? During the span of 1986 through 1996, some of the greatest Van Halen songs and biggest Van Halen hits were produced. So what are we to conclude? How are we to decipher a tie between David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar? That's easy. Both of them fit perfectly within the Van Halen in which they resided. In other words, Van Halen was perfect with both of them, and no one else could have been to Van Halen what they were during their respective eras. Period. Except appreciate, savor, love, and be in wondrous awe of both eras of Van Halen, because both eras and both vocalists are worthy of such. There you have it. The great Van Halen vocalist debate. Solved by the Music Tyrant. The Music Tyrant has spoken.